Alright, this video is about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. I'm going to go ahead and separate the video into two parts. This first video will be all page 1. The second video will be all page 2. So we're going to start off with photosynthesis. Now, for this very first part, this essential elements of life, you need to have these following colors to make this work. So you need purple, yellow, red, black, gray, and orange. For the rest of this, the colors are just, they're not mandatory, so you don't have to follow along, but I would suggest you at least exchange some of your colors so you have different colors. Colors help us remember things better, so having different colors will be useful. All right, so we're starting off talking about the essential elements of life. Now, if you remember, we talked about macromolecules already, and we talked about the elements that were found in each of our 4 types of macromolecules. Remember, we have carbs, we have proteins, we have lipids, and we have nucleic acids. So the essential elements of life, these are going to be the elements that are found in those macromolecules. So the very first one, the one that kind of links all of them together, is going to be carbon. And in chemistry, whenever you do any sort of chemistry stuff, writing formulas, they have some colors that are like standard for particular elements. So carbon typically is black. So we're going to start off with carbon, which is abbreviated, of course, with the letter C. And we're going to represent it with a single black circle here. Okay, so that's going to be one carbon atom. All right, the second element that we saw in all of our macromolecules was hydrogen. Now, typically, hydrogen in chemistry is white, but I can't write white on white, so I'm going to pick a gray for my hydrogen. So hydrogen. And if I see hydrogen on the periodic table, it is abbreviated H. Now, hydrogen is a special type of element called a diatomic element, meaning in nature it's always found in 2s. So it's going to be actually H2 there. And so we're going to represent that by 2 gray circles. Okay, so H2, 2 gray circles. The third element that we saw in all of our molecules, of course, was oxygen. And in chemistry, red represents oxygen, so I'm going to write that in red. Now, once again, oxygen is a diatomic element, so we're going to write it as an O2. O is what we see on the periodic table. There's always 2 of them together. So we're going to represent that with 2 red circles. Okay. Next up, we have nitrogen. Nitrogen is typically represented by purple. So I'm going to write in nitrogen. Nitrogen is also diatomic. On the periodic table, nitrogen is N. Because there's always 2 of them, we're going to write N2, and it's going to be represented by 2 purple circles. So they're bonded together. That's why we're drawing them so close together. All right. We also saw in our macromolecules that they contained phosphorus. Okay. On the periodic table, phosphorus is represented with the letter P. It is not a diatomic element, so I'm going to just use one little orange circle to represent that. And then last, but certainly not least, we have sulfur. Sulfur is represented by yellow. Okay, on the periodic table, sulfur is the letter S. It's not diatomic, so it just has 1 yellow circle. All right, so when we're drawing elements, we want to make sure we're using the right colors for all of these. So you'll kind of see that pattern as we move through. All right, we've talked a little bit about this, the law of conservation of matter. But if you remember, we said that the law of conservation of matter states that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. So we're going to go ahead and write that definition in here. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change forms. All right. So if we look here, we have represented a chemical reaction. So CH4 is methane plus oxygen. We burn it, because methane is something, a natural gas that we can burn. We burn it to make carbon dioxide and water. So the law of conservation of matter basically says that the 2 sides need to be equal. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line here and down the middle. On this side of the arrow, these are called my reactants. These are the things that are reacting in my chemical reaction. And on this side, these are going to be my products. These are the things that are produced from the chemical reaction. So going back to my standard colors, if I look here, I see CH4 plus 2O2. So what does the C stand for? It stands for carbon. So how many carbons do I have on this side? Well, there's no number next to that, so I have 1 carbon. Okay? If I look at this side of my CO2, how many carbons do I have? I have 1 carbon. So I have 1 carbon on the reactant side, and I have 1 carbon on the product side. Okay? I also have this H4 here. So of course H is going to be hydrogen. And how many hydrogens do I see? Well, I have that little number 4 there. I have 4 hydrogens. If I look over at this side, I have hydrogen again. I have H2O, so I have 2 hydrogens, but if I look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 2 waters, so I actually have a total of 4 hydrogens. All right? And then last, but certainly not least, we have these 2O2 molecules. So how many total oxygens do I have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 oxygens on this side. If I look over here, I have my 2 oxygens in my CO2, 1, 2. But I also have 1 in each of my waters, 3, 4. So once again, I have a total of 4 oxygens. So when you're doing a chemical reaction like this, the number of atoms of each type of element have to be the same on both sides of your arrow. The law of conservation says I can't lose any matter, I can only change its form. So we're basically changing it from methane and oxygen to carbon dioxide and water. We're just changing the form of it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about photosynthesis. So talking about photosynthesis, we need to come up with a definition, okay? My definition for photosynthesis is going to be pretty simple. Basically, we're using energy from the sun to make glucose. Okay? Using energy from the sun to make glucose, right? We all agree that's what photosynthesis is. Now, let's go ahead and write out our formula for photosynthesis. So we know that plants have to take in carbon dioxide, so they're actually going to take in 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. They're going to take in what else? They're going to take in water. So 6 molecules of water plus the sun, energy from the sun. Okay? And that's going to make our molecule of glucose, so C6H12O6, plus 6O2. So there's our formula for photosynthesis. Now, who does photosynthesis? What type of organisms? Well, it is done by all plants. Okay, so photosynthesis is performed by all plants. Some bacteria. Some bacteria are actually able to do this because they have chlorophyll, and some protists. So remember, we talked about the 6 kingdoms. So the protists are in the kingdom Protista, the domain Eukarya. Plants are also in the domain Eukarya, but the kingdom Plantae. But bacteria, the bacteria we're talking about, are in the domain Bacteria, the kingdom Eubacteria. Now, we're going to focus on eukaryotes for this particular set of the notes. So where does photosynthesis happen? It occurs in the chloroplasts of eukaryotes, specifically of the plants. Okay, so we're going to put occurs in the chloroplast of eukaryotes. All right, and I'm going to draw a little arrow here because that's what I'm talking about. Those are my chloroplasts. That's what they look like. All right.